Great. Well, as we're all gathering here, please have a seat. I feel like I'm inviting our panelists to have like a private coffee with me up here. So I'm going to take a seat. So I think we've been set up very nicely by both Frane and Khadija. And I was really struck especially by Khadija's message about, sort of taking a hopeful approach to our way of thinking about all of the threats that media face around the world. And also the point about solidarity. I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're all in this together. Like everybody who is fighting for a world in which, as Khadija put it, in which the right of freedom of access to information isn't just recognized, but is actually honored, that puts us all into the same boat. And we really couldn't have a better panel. I mean, honestly, star-studded, big thinking, but big doing panel to help us think these issues through. So we originally had an hour, so maybe now we have less than an hour. So I'm getting the sort of from Frane, it could be a little longer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce everyone very quickly because you probably will know them, and if you don't and you want to learn more, there's this thing called Google. You can find out more about each of our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them. I have a sort of a specific question that I want them all to address, and then it'll be very open-ended. And we also have a video, I think, from Teresa, so I'll introduce. Actually, why don't we, if I introduce her first, we have a short video from the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Teresa Ribeiro, who I think if we could show the video first, why don't we do that?
Welcome to the town hall of this year's IPI World Congress, which we are proud to co-organize on the crucial important issue of how to ensure media freedom in the age of artificial intelligence. We indeed face new frontiers, new challenges when speaking about media freedom in the age of AI. There is no denying that we live in a new reality, following sweeping changes through technological advancements, political transformation, and other means. Challenges to media freedom can never be seen detached from political, social, and technological realities. On World Press Freedom Day earlier this month, together with the special rapporteurs on freedom of expression of the multilateral system, I launched a joint declaration focusing on this interrelation between media freedom and democracy, acknowledging that the democratic role of the media is to disseminate information and ideas of public interest, as it promotes informed societies and public participation. Digital technologies and artificial intelligence have drastically transformed the way information is produced, disseminated, accessed, and consumed. And there is no doubt that all of this has a direct and significant impact on societies, on social cohesion, and democratic processes. Today's online information ecosystem, unfortunately, reflect the business practices of large platforms, which affect the visibility and accessibility of content of public interest. In this new reality, where our information ecosystems are convoluted with all kinds of information, we must promote the visibility and accessibility to free, independent, and pluralistic journalism by protecting the media that are able to report on accurate information and the variety of perspectives. We can ensure that they fulfill their role in ensuring an informed and engaged citizenry, bolstering democracy and contributing to peace and security. The impact of artificial intelligence on media freedom and pluralism is vast. We must engage all stakeholders in this process, working together to preserve the important role of the media in our societies toward a healthier online information space, one that is built on human rights and promotes free, independent and pluralistic media content. I regret that I'm not able to be with you in person, but I wish you, all of you, fruitful and inspiring discussions to identify ways forward for more pluralism and stronger media freedom.
Great. Thank you to the representative on freedom of media. So I want to start our conversation with our journalists first, and I actually want to start with Julia Angwin. Julia, who I'm sure many of you know, and if you haven't read her book, Dragnet Nation, you really must. Wall Street Journal, ProPublica, now New York Times contributor, founder of The Markup. Julia, you must be thinking a lot about the kinds of issues that are on the table here. AI, the future of democracy and access to information, and I'm specifically curious, what are the things that are on your agenda? And specifically as a media leader, what are the things that you're preparing for, that you're doing in this space?
How much time do you have? Because I have a lot to say. Well, I'll try to be brief, but basically, at a very basic level, I think it's important to recognize that artificial intelligence is a marketing term, and the things that we are talking about right now as AI are chatbots that write bad poetry, right? So I think we should call them poetry bots, and then we would be a little bit more honest about what they are and what they can do to serve us. But I would say that they're built on machine learning, and machine learning is something that I have used as a journalist in my work, because I believe that we need to collect as much data as possible and present the most rigorous findings we can. And so oftentimes when you're working with a large data set, a way to extract meaning from it is to use machine learning techniques to come up with some conclusions. And so I have been using what you might call AI in my reporting for a long time, but I think we're in a weird moment now where these kind of tools of machine learning are available to the public, but in a weird kind of rudimentary way that is not meaning to serve the goals that journalists have. Our goals are accuracy. The goals of these bots is to create the plausible feeling of a sentence, right? And so I think there's a lot of work that journalists need to do to understand how to deal with this, because I think this is unfortunately going to flood the information landscape with a lot of plausible sounding words that are going to probably pollute the landscape even more than it has been right now. And so I think we need to understand, honestly, my feeling as a journalist is I want to figure out what are the accuracy levels of these bots and make sure that the public understands what those are.
Right. So you've put on the table a number of different things, right? So AI as a tool, as a useful tool. I shouldn't even say AI, I guess. But also some of the potential threats that might be out there, and I hope we can return to those themes in this panel. I want to go to Andrian Krei, who's a editor-at-large at Süddeutsche Zeitung and a long-time observer, reporter globally and on issues in the digital space. I know, as you were saying before, digital just keeps pulling you back in. And Andrian, I wanted to ask you also what specifically, and perhaps also in reference to the kinds of issues that Julia has raised, what are the issues that you see? What are the ways that you either are using or that you're worried about uses of this new kinds of technology, particularly in the space of the variety of threats to media freedom today?
So at the Süddeutsche, we are also torn, like I think all journalists, that you have the tools, the machine learning tools that are quite useful, and it kind of mirrors the larger landscape of digital technology, that it allows you to do things you couldn't do before. Our exemplary case was the Panama Papers, where we had a whistleblower giving us 2.6 terabytes of files that amounted to over 11 million single documents. So no human team possible could work through these amounts of data information. And if you want to use it responsibly, you do have to do that. So machine learning was a great tool for that. And there were several other cases where these machines allowed us to do things we couldn't do before. And same when we report about it, it's interesting because I started to report about digital culture, but it was still a subculture, like in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was quirky and weird, and it was a very enthusiastic beat. So it was the great thing about digital technology, there was this hope for the future and the possibilities, and it was a great subject to grapple, and that changed. That changed sometime in the beginning of the millennium, and it changed for the worse and the worse and the worse, and so now we're split. I mean, there's still, I think, even in the new forms of machine learning and generative AI as it's marketed, there's some great uses for science. For example, if you take AlphaFold by DeepMinds, that is basically creating a dictionary of the language of biological life, that is a great boost for technology. But on the other hand, you have military machine learning that is right now having a great moment because it gives the upper hand to Ukraine, but you kind of see on the horizon that there might be trouble in that direction. And then what we're watching warily, both as a media outlet and also as reporters, is that I think we learned a lot in the last wave of digitalization, what it can do, especially the filter bubbles. The filter bubbles that became this engine of divisiveness in society. And I'm afraid that the new generative AI has the potential to turn these filter bubbles into ego bubblets. And if you look at how Google is restructuring their environment right now, this is the way to go. So if you have not even filter bubbles anymore, but ego bubbles where people are in these thought loops, that's a mental health problem, a societal problem, a political problem, but for us media, it's also an attention problem, a big attention problem.
Okay, so more sort of light thinking for this group. And by the way, as maybe with 15 minutes left or so, I'll sort of turn to you for any questions. So as we're going through this and we're missing, I mean, this is a room full of journalists, so I'm sure you've got like 10,000 questions that you'd rather me be asking. So there'll be opportunity, I mean, not for 10,000 questions, but for at least a couple of questions toward the end. So I want to sort of turn now to my immediate left to Siddharth Varadarajan, who is a founder of The Wire in India. And so Siddharth, I mean, you work in a space where it's famously difficult to be an independent journalist today. And I wonder how you, in particular, are thinking about these new tools. Are they providing you with a way of dealing with getting information, accurate information, to a public that is also facing a significant amount of disinformation and media capture? How do you see these tools, and how are you able to use them?
I mean, we are at a very initial stage. In India, in general, the discussion in the media on AI has not progressed very far. And frankly, we are a small organization. Total number of journalists, maybe 35 or 40. So not that much of luxury of playing around and experimenting and stuff. But I can tell you that my own newsroom is pretty divided. I have colleagues who say we should have nothing to do with AI and ChatGPT in particular, and others like myself who feel that we should actually experiment and see what are some of the useful things that could be derived. But I think the discussion, I mean, I think it's important to flag because there is a sense of panic all around. Among stakeholders in different fields. Academics, of course, are dealing with the impact of AI and ChatGPT in terms of the integrity of term papers and stuff. Journalists worry about the proliferation of fake news, or on the other hand, that maybe jobs may be at stake if AI gets more widely adopted and proven as a useful technology. And of course, you have the technology people themselves who've issued a statement saying that this is something that we need to put a stop on. The fact is that human history and the history of technology tells us that you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. And I think is useful for us, not that I want to be sanguine or optimistic, but the fact is over the last 200 years, as technologies have evolved, communication and sort of media technologies, they have been used by malevolent actors. So printing presses were used by, or the cyclostyle machine by the Tsarist, Black Hundreds to produce protocols of the elders of Zion on a very cheap paper. And then you had the Rise of a Nation, the U.S., the Ku Klux Klan film, and then the use of film by Hitler, and then of course the internet, and so social media, like in India, social media is a great way for us in the independent media to reach our public, and it has leveled the dissemination playing field in unimaginable ways. But social media is also a place which powerful political actors have gamed and used, right? So AI is going to be one of those things. Now, of course, the caveat here is that over the years, the cost of using this kind of technology has been falling, and hence access is greater and greater, and the capabilities of these technologies has grown by leaps and bounds. What ChatGPT can do today is much more than what it was able to do 6 or 7 months ago. So frankly, I think that we need to have conversations and discuss, and in particular, how to spot and deal with the proliferation of counterfeit and forgeries and fakes. But we can't turn the clock back, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we've put on the table basically a kind of a set of positives and negatives, right? The use of machine learning for going through just the massive amounts of data that we need in order to report these days. But we also have the examples of the negative uses of these technologies, but of technology throughout the history of technology, right? So I want to turn to Dunya Mijatovic, who's former representative on freedom of the media for the OSCE, currently the Human Rights Commissioner for the Council of Europe, and an overall, I think for many of us, human rights hero when it comes to independent media and human rights. So Dunya, you've kind of straddled these two, and your career in broadcast regulation preceding your work as a human rights leader. You've sort of straddled these environments, both as seeing how these tools can be used for good, but also, I think, very concerned about the potential for their abuse. Where do you think we should be focusing our attention today? Where are you focusing your attention in terms of ensuring that there's an environment in which these technologies can be used for good and not be used as tools to interfere with freedom of expression, access to information, et cetera?
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you all for listening to us, and it's really great to be back to Vienna, to my sort of really home environment, if I can say so, and also the topics that we are trying to cover today are very close to my interest, but also to my heart, because of the engagement I had on many issues related to the struggle for free media and free expression worldwide. You said something about panic, and I think this is not the first time that we are dealing with something new, creating fear and panic and concerns, which is fine. We have to do this, but at the same time, I think there is something missing. This is actually some kind of reality in which kind of world we are entering at the moment, with sort of sober look. I remember the time when we were introducing internet freedom to the OSCE. And you were part of it. There are many people that were part of the team organizing this conference in 2012, I think, where there were huge concerns and also questions coming from the governments on how we are going to deal with this, what shall we do, and then of course the issue that will be discussed today prominently by the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media on online safety of female journalists, which I think it's particularly crucial nowadays. I will try to move away from what you were talking about and briefly tell you what we do at the Council of Europe when it comes to AI. Of course, the issue of freedom of expression is tackled through algorithms, and we try to look at it, but I'm sure this is going to be discussed in these 2 days. In 2018, when I came to the office, of course, the topic of the AI started popping out of the box of what are the priorities for the office in the near future at that time. And of course, AI could not be neglected in any way. So we started looking into this. It was a completely new topic that, of course, concerned all human rights. But the problem was lack of information, lack of data. So we started collecting from member states that are advanced, like Estonia. So one of the first trips where I tackled the AI issue was Estonia, where we tried to understand the benefits, but also the problems. The government that was introducing regulation, but also oversight in good faith, for sure. And then the problems they notified in the process of implementing AI. And they were seen is employment, they were seen in the work of public service broadcasting, they were seen in the issues related to social security. So actually social and economic rights, which are somehow neglected most of the time, but not now after the pandemic. So the pandemic also had extremely an important role in turning us to more human rights oriented approach towards the AI. And we produced, after many briefings we had with experts, with human rights defenders in different countries, with journalists, produced in a way a decalogue unboxing AI and human rights for the future. And this is still the document that is leading us in a new chapter of the work of the office, which in a way was finalized a few weeks ago with the new report on AI, where there are many issues and recommendations to the governments, because of course, we are trying to talk to the governments in order to tell them how to safeguard, how to protect people, citizens, and that is missing. Oversight and regulation is very weak. Or they are moving in the direction of talking about this, like Frane just stated at the G7, but there are many other events where you hear about the need to regulate, about the need to do something, about the need to embark on a new sort of way of legislating. But nobody is mentioning human rights. And when I say human rights, I'm of course thinking also about freedom of expression, access to information. As Khadija was saying, that is actually a fight that is the ultimate sort of goal for all of us, journalists or not, because if access is to information, independent, truthful information is jeopardized by the AI systems, then we are going to embrace in the era that is definitely not something we want to see. But the statements, from the big shots controlling actually, the internet, to pause for 6 months, and all these sort of like, sensational announcements, somehow I don't buy it. I have a feeling, that that's very irresponsible sort of request to the society after all the developments and everything they managed to do. It suddenly stopped for 6 months, so like something is going to happen in 6 months, and of course it creates fear. and more people are trying to stop the development because, you know, we should not forget about the benefits. But of course, the issue of regulating is crucial. At the moment, Council of Europe is debating, the body created is called CAI, it's intergovernmental. It has all 46 member states and observers, the US, Japan, Canada, and some others sitting at the same table, debating on a new convention, a treaty. We are following closely. But I'm calling all the time, you know, to see which kind of safeguards and which kind of oversight is going to be recommended and produced, because the danger is also there when you have many people trying to see their sort of interest and producing something without enough information can also be dangerous. So I do hope that the engagement of many that are outside of the process and their recommendations and their concerns will be taken into account, and I will definitely continue following this.
Great, that's really helpful. So we've sort of put on the table a whole range of issues here, which there's no way we're going to resolve. But I want to turn back to Julia. You've been, you know, like a very close observer, both of tech's development, but also the regulation of tech. And I wonder how you see this particular moment. I mean, it's a very odd moment, both in the United States and globally, where you have the leader of one of the main, I mean, the leader of OpenAI, Sam Altman, going to Congress and say, regulate me, which seems to be a bit of a, I wouldn't say the most genuine pitch, but I wonder what you think in terms of the possibility of regulation in this space, if that's something that the media writ large should look forward to. How do we cover it? I mean, there's a million questions here. Take whichever you'd like, basically. But how should we be thinking about the possibility of regulating AI?
I mean, that's such a great question, and I think it is very hard to answer because we don't yet know sort of the landscape of harms. I think that's the challenge here, is that they've released these poetry bots into the world, but they obviously are being used for far more than poetry, and we are learning every day through an article here, an article there about like, oh, it gave me wrong medical information. Oh, it created a scenario, you know, trying to spread misinformation. Oh, it tried to break up, you know, this New York Times reporter's relationship with his wife. Like all these things we hear about, and what we're missing is the denominator, right? So what we don't know is in 80 tries, how many were accurate and how many were insane. And we kind of need an insane over accurate number. And so I think in those kind of spaces, it's very difficult to regulate. And so what I feel as a journalist is that I feel like my calling is to try to put that data on the table. What is the accuracy level? What are the harms? What does it look like? And I think that's what the work of all journalists should be, is to cover this as any other new harm that we would see. But I would also say that it's important to take a moment on that whole regulate me thing. Because, you know, Mark Zuckerberg's been saying that for 10 years. And so it's become part of the playbook, right? Like going to Congress and saying regulate me. But I want to say one thing that's really different about the AI piece of it, which is Sam Altman has particularly been talking up the fear, right? I'm worried about human extinction, right? You know what this reminds me of? So the book I wrote before Dragnet Nation, which no one remembers, was about a website called MySpace. And you know, if anyone remembers it, it was like a competitor to Facebook. But it reminded me of back then, MySpace marketed itself as the dangerous place. They wanted to be known as the nightclub to Facebook's clean, well-lighted campus. At that time, Facebook really was like it was like just a university hangout place. MySpace wanted to be the nightclub. And so they actually played up the danger to make it sexy. And that's what I feel like is happening here with this end of human extinction. I mean, how is a poetry bot going to extinction me, right? Like, so I do feel like there's a bit of marketing to make it sexy and dangerous. And when it comes to regulation, like I think the real truth of the matter is we are not seeing any regulation on any front in the United States, right? We can't even pass a privacy law. Every other country has one. So I don't feel like there's a huge risk of anything happening in the US. EU has been leading on regulation and honestly has been the most thoughtful in terms of the Digital Services Act, which I'm really excited to see implemented. It's the first ever attempt to regulate algorithms, which, like, let's be real, an algorithm is AI. I mean, all of these terms are just indistinguishable, right? And so they've done a thoughtful approach to it, which is to recognize that putting a technical barrier like, okay, it only can have this much error or whatever, is the wrong approach. And instead, they've put the burden on the companies to quantify the harm and then mitigate it. And then giving that information to journalists to vet and to the independent world to say, like, are those assessments of harm and are those mitigations appropriate? So that feels like something I'm really excited about. And I have to say, I'm really concerned that if it doesn't work, then we will be at a place where we have global speech regulators, these tech companies, which are larger and more powerful than many nation states. If the EU's attempt to regulate them doesn't work, I'm actually concerned that we're going to, as a world, feel like they're too big to regulate.
Right, that's totally fair. And I want to sort of get your take on it as well from within Europe, maybe Andriana from the Indian perspective, but also a global perspective. How do you see this moment in terms of the possibility of there being regulation? So, Andriana, I mean, you're in Europe, you're covering Europe, this space very, very closely. What are you hearing? Are you as sanguine about tools such as, you know, the AI regulatory regime or the DSA and how it's going to, again, move us toward, I mean, if the theme of our panel is sort of democracy in an age of AI, is it moving us in that direction? How do you see it?
I want to quickly come back to the doomerism that you described, where they go like, we created something that's gonna end the world. Please help us, regulate us, which is this weird mix between. It's a kind of a toxic cocktail between marketing and an ideology. There's a new acronym out, TESCREAL. We can't go into it because it's such a weird, blown up ideology mix of the tech scene that reads like out of a really bad sci-fi novel. But basically what they do, and they've done it before in other AI hype cycles, they take kind of a hyperbole apocalyptic worldview on their own product to make it, first of all, look really powerful and also to deflect from things that could be regulated. So Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and Ilya Sutskever just came out with another letter basically asking to create an international atomic energy organization for AI, which already puts it out there. It's like, we are the new atomic bomb. No, you're poetry bots who can wreak havoc on society, and it's going to be much more less exciting and much more boring. In Germany, we have a thing called the TÜV. TÜV is the Technische Überwachungsverein. It's like one of the most bureaucratic, boring organizations, and you go there and they check: do your brakes work adequately? Do you have your seatbelts correctly installed and stuff like that? So that's something we probably need, not an atomic energy organization, something that just checks each digital product that comes out. And there's nothing like that anywhere in the world. Not like some supranational superpower, but something really boring, low level. Does this have brakes that work? Does this have seat belts?
Yeah, please, Julia.
Just let me jump in quickly and say, like, also, can we just pause and say, how did we get to a world where you get to release products where you don't know if the brakes work, right? Like, it used to be in the old days that you had to release products that had some quality control, and now what happens is these companies release them and testing, it happens in the real world on us.
Right. I mean, this is the move fast and break things kind of model of tech for years, right? And it's what
beta testing has been part of tech development from the start.
Right. So Siddharth, speak to that a little bit.
I mean, I want to make 2 or 3 points just drawing on some of the things that colleagues have said. I think on the issue of regulation, I would be extremely wary of, in fact, it makes me uncomfortable to, at this stage, have governments even discussing this. Certainly governments in my part of the world, because I know what their instincts are, right? We are dealing with a situation where already big tech is trying to regulate and police speech, decide what's valid and what's not, what should be played up, what shouldn't. You are in a world where governments exert extraordinary influence on big tech. We know this in the US, we know this in India, Brazil, various places. So information that is bona fide, that the government of India doesn't like, it can tell Twitter, fabricate a kind of legal pretext, and Twitter is either too scared or too lazy to pursue a legal challenge to that, and they just give in. And we have tons of examples of this, right? So that's the reality of our world. So to arm governments and tech people with even more, the ability to regulate an emerging technology of this kind, that worries me. Having said that, sadly, AI, the poetry stuff is the fun bit, right? The nutty bit. But we are already seeing examples of AI-generated stuff out there, right? How many of you remember that photograph of Putin genuflecting before Xi Jinping at the last meeting? There was this very realistic-looking picture that appeared in a sequence of photographs, right? So it seemed as if it was part of, the same frame. Fake photo generated through AI, very hard, and the number of people, including in those days the blue tick handles that were circulating this. So I would rather that the tech naysayers or the fearmongers and governments that are concerned come up with, just like you have biodefense, I think what we need to be looking at is how to equip ourselves with the ability to spot what's been fabricated, to spot a malevolent use of this technology. I would be much happier if we were in a position to be able to apply some kind of test, to say, look, so that on momentary inspection, this video of Obama saying something is rubbish, or this photograph is fake. So far, this has been in the realm of fun. Even these photographs, like poetry, it's been the realm of fun, right? But when you have a devious mind that's highly skilled and proficient in manipulating images using AI, come up with stuff can be highly disruptive, right? So I think the answer to that is to find defenses against it rather than preemptive regulation. Certainly not in a situation where, as Julia says, we still don't know we still haven't cataloged what it can and can't do.
Right. So, this has been a problem since the very beginning of the conversation about fake news and disinformation, right? Which is, like, who's deciding that, right? Who's making the decision, even about the photograph, as to whether this is legit or not? We've got 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to come to maybe collect a few questions in a second. If we're able to do that, maybe send a microphone around. But I want to ask Dunya, this is kind of we're in a difficult moment, right? On the one hand, regulation might serve to either interfere with a potentially useful technology or to interfere with freedom of expression. Journalists being able to use these tools maybe could actually create space for surveillance in some ways that we wouldn't expect. So from a human rights perspective, what's your kind of guidance to both states and to civil society as to how we should react to this moment?
It is very complex, but it's also, somehow very, very clear. Of course, in this room, it would be quite, astonishing and, really interesting to hear that we are here talking about need for regulation. Because that's, something that you normally do not hear from people promoting free speech and access to free information, not to mention the role of journalists. But regulation is needed. We need some kind of mechanism. And why? It is mainly because of vulnerable groups. It is mainly because of the ones that can be affected because of lack of education, lack of information. We already have cases of human rights defenders being affected in a very sort of intrusive way without being able to know how to deal with this. So when I think of need for some kind of standards or something, I always go into multilateral world, international sort of approach that can help or should help governments to move in at least some kind of right direction. But there is a need for oversight. I know in the US is a completely different approach than in Europe, and I also agree that the EU has a very bureaucratic and very kind of brutal way of regulating many things. But there is a way in the middle that could be explored. We need oversight. We have national human rights institutions, ombuds offices that should be dealing, and they are already dealing, many of those institutions. They should be more equipped, more educated. What is needed, again, like we were talking before about internet literacy, now there is a need for AI literacy. We are showered with articles constantly, every day, all over, about different approaches, and it's difficult to find even a balance in order to see where and in which direction we should go. But when it comes to all human rights that we are trying to tackle with the approach towards the AI and the new technologies, we also have to understand that AI is also part of the global sort of approach to the new technologies. It's not just AI, something new that somebody invented yesterday, but the whole sort of network of the new technology is already there, and many of those issues are already regulated. So it is quite, I would say, important time. I would not say at a crossroads, that we are at a crossroads when it comes to many issues related to human rights. But the fact that we are already dedicating so much time and trying to answer some of the questions that are important here for journalism, I think it's crucially important. But the problem is much bigger than just freedom of expression. And the way it affects people, it's tremendous, and that's why I think there is a need for some kind of safeguards, but it's also for some other time, and discussion.
I mean, that's, I think, very useful, and I think actually I'm with Julia on the DSA as offering a potential space here on the risk assessment side, right? At least forcing those who are developing these products to say, this is what we're doing, and here are the risks that we're identifying, and opening that up to the public, especially to journalists, to kind of interrogate that. So maybe we have just a few minutes, and this is a way we could kind of come to close our panel. If maybe we could collect 2 or 3 questions. Do we have the possibility of circulating a mic? If we have hands, I'll pick 3 people, this great, enormous power that I have here. I have a question right here, a woman right here in the second row. And it'll be exercise time for whoever's carrying the mic. So if you could just keep your question very brief, and then we'll go through and I'll ask the panelists to just pick a question that they want to answer. And if you could please introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Ginko Kobayashi for Japanese media. My question is, how is it valid in this world to, for example, there is a regulation maybe agreed amongst Western countries, and then how is it valid to impose or to be introduced in other areas of the world, like China, because even the other countries in the world, except the West, cannot agree with treating Russia as a really bad country to invade Ukraine. So how is it valid? For example, Chinese technology people may want to do some lots of development. Thank you.
Great question. Second question, we could just go right here, and then you don't have to run too far.
Thank you very much for the wonderful panel. I'm a Hiroki Sugita, columnist of Kyodo News of Japan. I think that all of the people here, and especially on the panel, you are the senior journalists who have the very rich experience in and how to deal with the new technology. But if you are here to advise young journalists, just journalists out of college who don't have the great experience like you have, what would you advise to those people in terms of the dealing with the AI and especially the chat GPT things? Thank you.
Two great questions. Do we have a third question? All right, right here on the edge here, I see a hand. Keep going. There we are. Great.
Hi, my name is Anna. I am from Faktograf, a non-profit media organization in Croatia. And I'll try to fit this in a very short question. So I feel like many of the topics that you talked about here are very, very different if you're talking about something that's in English and something that's in a different language other than English. Even regulation, even the amount of time and money companies or platforms want to invest in dealing with basically their users that come from non-English speaking countries. So I would like to maybe ask you if you have any kind of thoughts on that. And also, I think often on these types of conferences or congresses, we are in this sort of bubble where we would mostly agree what trusted media is, and I'm not very sure that the rest of the world would put their trust in the media, the same media that we would. So my question here is, how do you think that AI is going to basically influence the amount of jobs that people in the media sphere are going to have in the future? And what can we do about the huge amount of pollution and disinformation that we are going to face in the future?
There's really great questions, even if it was more than one in one. It was really excellent use of...
There were 6 questions there.
Yeah, exactly, definitely successful journalism career displayed right there. So, I mean, really a whole set of interesting questions. And so maybe to close it up, and also these questions are great because they highlight, this was we took we had less than an hour, and it was kind of a narrow slice of this topic, which I think that the next couple of days are going to expand out. Whether we're talking about how these kinds of conversations operate in a world when you have new technologies coming from places like China or elsewhere where the same kind of sense of risk might not be a part of the calculation, or also just this general question of, is this a question about, or are we handling this or addressing it from sort of a American-European perspective without thinking about the broader impact? So a lot of great questions here. Maybe I'll just go down the list and you could pick a question that you want to answer, just a couple of seconds, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Just telegraphically, advice to the young person would be to experiment and play around with it and understand what its capabilities are. Ma'am, great question on the geographic, the fact that different countries have different perspectives. And honestly, if you look at the state of global negotiations on internet governance, prime example, so good luck trying to regulate AI at the global level. And don't forget, no matter what regulation you have, there will be some guy sitting in his mom's basement who is not going to listen to those regulations and is going to be developing technology and finding ways to seed that. So that's the reality. I think we need to think of defenses. And you asked too many questions, but I think you're right about the languages. My sense, just looking at in India where we have dozens of them, what happens in English very rapidly gets reflected. I mean, the discussions and debates and even the technologies get reflected in the languages. I cannot open Facebook in India now without Facebook automatically pushing me off English into the language of the region from where I'm accessing it. That may be a good or bad thing, but I think that, and I think there will be an issue with jobs, but people will retool. When computers came, journalists were worried. Journalists keep getting worried. But I don't think this is an issue of lack of jobs, frankly.
Yeah, thanks. Andrea, and just, we probably do have to wrap up, but take one of them.
I'll quickly pick up on the non-English internet, which I think is a huge problem, and there's not a solution right there. But if you dig into it, for example, I mean, the most dramatic case was Facebook's role in Myanmar and the persecution and basically genocide of the Rohingya people. And if you look at the development there, I mean, it's when the massacre started, there was one guy who spoke Burmese monitoring Facebook, and he was in Dublin. And then it gotten a bit better, but people were still in Manila or in all over the world, but very few in there. And I think this is a massive problem, and the NGOs who are trying to tackle that problem are completely overwhelmed. And Facebook uses 80 to 90% of all the resources in monitoring on English language content, and the rest is for the thousands of other languages. So that's what advice for young people, I think, is always don't use ChatGPT, go out.
Right, get out there. Dunya.
And of course, going back to something we concluded long ago, education. It is, literacy in all issues. And there, I think that the states, democratic or not, are failing tremendously. This is something that, that calls for a huge investment in educating societies. We failed when it comes to internet literacy. We failed, I think, greatly in many parts of the world when it comes to media literacy, starting with this. And now we are in this, somehow we call it a new world, trying to answer all these, very relevant questions about geographical sort of, approaches and differences, but states should, as a start, they should really make sure that companies have human rights standards and human rights safeguards. And this could be a starting point in order to protect at least most vulnerable parts of the societies. Here, I'm not going to engage into, journalists and, their role, because I think that is going to be explored quite a lot today and tomorrow. But here, if we talk about the ones also in different parts of the world where there is no possibility for any kind of regulation or any kind of human rights standards, we need to continue, struggle to find a way to protect them. And that is not going to stop with AI or anything else. And this is happening as we speak, even in the Council of Europe region, which is European continent that you would think, it's advanced when it comes to human rights standards. Somebody mentioned, the lady mentioned Ukraine and Russia and the effect of the new technologies in order to spread fake news, but much more than that, warfare, and many other issues, and people using new technologies in order to find missing members of the family or children. So there are things, that we can really embrace as important, but at the same time, we also have to be very careful, because the last thing I would like to see personally is that journalism and free speech and free mind is affected in any way, and that's what we need to protect.
Julia,
I'll try to be fast, but I'm really glad to hear a question about trust, because I do feel like that is the most important thing that we need to solve as journalists. That's what we sell to the audience, is they need to trust us. And I think that it's important to recognize that in the world we're in right now, journalists were traditionally witness. Our job was to go witness an event and tell you what happened. And now a lot of people can witness things, and they do, right? And they send a picture on their smartphone. And so what it has done is confuse the public a little bit about who they should trust. And also, because of deepfakes, because of AI, et cetera, our job is now, in some ways, forensics. How true are those witness events that you're seeing? How much can you trust what you've seen? Is that picture of the Pope? I thought it was real first when I saw it. I was like, that guy is rocking it. And, but we need journalists to dissect that. And so I have devoted my career to really pursuing forensics and then being really, really clear about my methodology and writing long descriptions of the methodology, because I think that's how you get the readers to trust you. You have to show your work. These days, I don't think that the brand name is enough to engender trust. You have to show your work, you have to prove what you did.
Dunya, did you want to?
Just to add, you mentioned digital forensic. Again, Ukraine was mentioned, because Ukraine is a country that is on our agenda all the time. How did we find out about atrocities in Bucha at the beginning of the war? It was actually journalists that went there, took photos that Russian side said are fake photos. It's not, this never happened. It was staged by Ukrainians. Digital forensic, journalists working with digital forensic, with AI, with many other tools, proved this to be truthful information. I went with my team in May to Bucha, to the places where all those, people were lying, killed and tortured. And we went based on the information that was provided to us, to certain people that we had to talk to in order to find out what happened to them. But we knew already then that this is a truthful information. And it was, not listening to any of the governments, not listening to any of the international organizations, but it was actually what journalists provided based on their reports, first of all, and then digital forensic that was used in order to prove that it was a truthful information.
Great. So we're going to close this first town hall panel. And I would just say a couple of things to sort of wrap it up. One is, we've talked a lot about transparency from government, or at least the possibility of regulation from government and from company, but I think Julia's point about showing your work is also kind of a recognition that one of the ways that we see that we do this work, or that journalists do this work and can build that trust, is also showing your work. And that might be a form of resilience. I mean, it costs money, but it's also a form of resilience against some of these threats, perhaps. It's a way to address it. The other thing I would mention is, and just to close, is I guess the bar was low after Twitter's glitches yesterday, if you followed any of that. But I want to thank this panel for just really getting us started for these couple of days with a real high level of thinking about both what is the problem. I mean, I don't think we answered anything, in particular, we're honest with ourselves, but what is the problem? What is the way for us to start thinking about the potential, either good or bad, of regulation? What should companies be doing? What should journalists be doing? So I really want to thank this panel for really getting us started, and thank you, the audience, and those questions for launching this first panel. So thanks to everybody.